Welcome to Beyond Spend, the podcast where we explore the future of travel and expense management, accounts payable, and payments. We're bringing you the latest insights to help simplify your operations, optimize spend, and drive growth. Get ready for what's next.
So a little bit of intro for those folks that have attended. Welcome to the second Emburse podcast called Beyond Spend. Today, what we're going to be talking about is just the application of data, and the consolidation of travel and expense data to see if, we can make some magic happen. And is it possible? Is it a panacea? We've been talking about it forever. What's the holdback? All that kind of fun stuff. Before I do that, a couple of events are coming up of note. May 20th through the 22nd in Nashville is what we call Emburse in Motion. It's sort of a user conference that you can attend. If you want more information, it's on the Emburse website, and you can register and all that kind of good stuff, see the agenda. There's also a podcast coming up, or a webinar, I'm sorry, on how to use data to drive ROI within your company. That's on January 23rd. And again, you can go to the Emburse website to find out more details and register. All right. So enough of introduction, or at least intro. So I'm going to hand it over to Steve and Sophia to do their intros. So Steve, you want to kind of talk a little bit about your background, who you are, that kind of fun stuff?
Sure. I'm Stephen Mandelbaum, Senior Vice President with EAB. We work primarily with educational customers. We call them partners, and I run our internal operations, including our travel, events, and our expense program.
And you're responsible for a certain aspect of technology, right?
All internal technology. So my portfolio is travel, expense, events, our real estate, so our offices, our internal technology, including all of our enterprise systems, so everything from our sales system, our CRM systems, to our websites and things like that, procurement, and a bunch of other functions.
Yeah, and that's always something I thought was really unique, in that you're one of the few, if the only guy I know, or gal, that has travel as well as all that responsibility around the technology to support it, and other things.
We find it goes very well together. It's hard to do these things in a vacuum, and we get the power when we put it all together. Right. So I think that makes our program unique, and it's made what we've done very unique, because we have all those disciplines together. And most of the folks on my team do a little bit of everything. So it's been fun.
All right, good. Sophia, you want to do a quick intro?
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. My name is Sophia Walker. I lead our enterprise solutions consulting team here in North America and APAC at Emburse. Our solutions teams, a little bit about what that means, right? That's an incredible group of industry experts that are working with our existing customers. They're working with prospective customers, and the goal being to understand where there may be opportunities for improvement within the spend programs of each of those.
Okay, so if I understand right, I mean, you work with the Emburse clients to help them kind of maximize the benefit from the technology, right?
Absolutely. Project involvement, program involvement, all kind of falls under that umbrella.
Yeah, and that includes data, reporting, analytics.
Certainly.
Yeah, all that stuff as well. Okay, great. And then just quick introduction, I'm Steve Reynolds, Chief Strategy Officer at Emburse. I work with all things strategic, whatever that means. So I just kind of do what Marty tells me, the CEO. All right, so let's get into kind of the topic at hand. So what I want to discuss is we've got travel data, right? You got the stuff that comes out of the GDS. In some cases, you've got supplier direct data. Some clients have been effective in capturing that. And then you have expense data, which is the stuff I do when I fill out an expense report. I scan a receipt, I link it in, I didn't do a bunch of manual entry. But to date, there hasn't been a whole lot of ability. I know there's been effort, but I mean, I've been talking about this for 20 years. I remember back in my days with Amex GBT, we were trying to get card data and such to kind of combine it together with travel to see if some magic would happen. And we were never really effective in doing it for a whole variety of reasons. I know Concur has been talking about it and making promises around the combination of travel and expense and what could happen there. And I don't know if they've been really effective in delivering on that. Emburse is really putting a lot of effort into this and such. But just some initial thoughts from you guys around this concept of combining travel and expense data, and could potentially what the outcome could be. So Steve, you want to touch on it first?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to payments, though. So for years, Concur, or I'm going to go back to even like ClickBook and whatever their predecessor expense was, they talked about the triple match, right? So you had like the booking, you had the information from the supplier, and then you had the credit card receipt. And Tom used to do this like big presentation where he talked about the triple match. But I'm not so sure that that's the goal here. You only need the triple match when you have everything sort of disaggregated and you try and put it together at the end. So a little bit of what you were talking about, Steve. I think we've sort of evolved in certain places where you can, if you have the right plumbing and the right payment channels and the right booking channels, you may not have the mess that you have today. I think it's come from, a bunch of disconnected systems and processes that don't talk to one another. And so there's always been the question of like, how much did I spend on air? And nobody knew the answer, right? Is it what the agency did in booking? Is it what was paid on the credit card? Actually, worse than that was hotels, right? Was it what was, went through the agency for booking? Was it what was paid for on a credit card? Was it what we saw on a folio? And the answer was always none of them, right? Because everything was missing something or had too much of another. But I think that if you start to channel it right in the right ways and have the right processes, I think we're probably further on our way than we've ever been as an industry today.
So you're saying that the problem's solved, or that you've solved the problem?
We've solved a huge chunk of it. Yes, we've solved a huge chunk of it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
It's not totally solved, and you're going to poke all the holes in it. I know, because that's what you do for a living. I don't know if you do it for a living or you do it as a hobby, but it's all the same to me. I'm ready for the cross-examination. But I think we've solved a lot of it, or we have a path to getting there.
Okay.
I think sometime soon.
All right. Well, I'm really curious to hear the solution to this.
Well, really I didn't say I was going to tell you the solution.
You just said you did. Anyway, okay. Sophia.
I said I had. I would say it. There's a difference between two, but that's okay. We'll get the keeper in. We'll see where we go.
All right, Sophia. What are your thoughts on this? High-level thoughts on this topic?
I just can't help but, chuckle at what you just said, Stephen, because I think that it begs the question, like, where is the value, right? So is it in defining the policy, in defining how we're going to enforce that policy, defining what we're going to serve up to our end users and how we're going to serve it up to them? And really, is it more so just in having that overall context versus being able to control in specific segments of that behavior? That's, it's kind of indicative in what you said at the beginning, right? Where you have so many disciplines underneath your role and within your function within the business. That context allows you to have much more influence in what is valuable versus what may not be a valuable exercise. And the shaping of that program, right? Just understanding more information about each individual person, their role, their general expensing behavior, how they travel on behalf of the business. That data, the context is where I see the value in being able to, again, shape the program in valuable ways, as well as we're shaping the experience.
Yeah, one initial just kind of thought around that is the value varies based on the size of the company. And so what you described is getting down to the traveler level and sort of looking at their behavior. As a small company, I can get my head around that. I've got 200 employees. Seeing an outlier kind of makes sense, someone I can go talk to and fix. But when you get to the larger, global multinational companies, that's not what they want. Or at least that's what they tell me. It's like that's way unmanageable. I don't want details on 40,000 travelers. I need high level divisional, some sort of bucketing of this information so I can go to sales and say, guys, you're just way out of compliance on average. You need to go talk to the entire team to fix these problems. So I think it's just something we've got to keep our head.
That's why they never get success.
What's that?
I think that's why they never get success, right? The devil's in the details. The thing about travel is that all the spend is made up of lots of little transactions and lots of little behaviors. And so what happens is that they don't go to the detail. They take a look at these larger trends, and one of two things happen. You either really can't change the tide on the larger trends without looking at the details, so it doesn't work, or they do these foolish draconian moves where, like, we are no longer going to do X. And you're like, right. Well, was all X bad? Sophia's had a slightly more empathetic view of the world than I would have had on this, but I do think the devil's in the details here. I think what you're talking about, Steve, is true. Like, I see that all the time. I hear that from peers in the industry all the time. Like, they look in these high levels, and then they can't move the dial. It becomes hard to move the dial, or they take these draconian measures to move the dial, which gives them some short-term wins, but it creates problems elsewhere. So I think that's the challenge.
But I think that's why the combination has potential for success, in that I can look at just card data, receipt data, and say, all right, you spent $500 at a hotel. That's kind of all I really know, and maybe a little bit around the room. But when you combine it with the travel side, I can see the room rate, the type of room, the type of bed, the type of seat on the airline, all this kind of detail that gets lost, when you look at the card or maybe even the expense data. So that combination of the two, it feels like gets you where you want, but you kind of have to, in my opinion, need it and have it available. Is that kind of what you're describing, Steve?
Yeah, you have to have it all available, right? Because, knowing the spend and the detail is not enough. You also got to know what was available at the time they booked it. That's what's made TripAm so powerful, right? Like, I want to make sure I've gotten, I bought at the right time. We live in a dynamic environment, right? So you got to get it in all pieces of the equation. You got to do it at the planning process, at the booking process, at the spend like everywhere money can drip out and leak.
But you don't have expense data in the planning process necessarily.
You don't. No, you don't. But I want to be damn sure that whatever we approve the planning happens on the other side, or I want to understand how it changed, because that'll influence what I do in the future.
Yeah. No, you want to carry it forward, to your point. And I think it really, in my mind, it comes around, the approval process around expenses is rather draconian. Just having to manually look at these receipts and look at what was spent. No one's really doing that, even though that's kind of what's expected.
We don't do that.
It's just too cumbersome. And so it should be fully automated. It should be, look, if it's within the bounds, if what you planned is what you booked, which is what you spent, great, let's let it go. Pay the guy or pay the gal, right? So in my mind, the combination of travel and expense, the number one value is potentially, there is some analytics and overall spend and getting a feel there, but just being able to approve an expense report without any sort of manual review is a huge win. It saves a ton of time across a pretty good chunk of people, me included. Would you agree with that? You seem skeptical.
We don't do it that way. So, I've never been a fan of expense approvals, especially manager approvals, because I feel like managers just like rubber stamp. They're not going to fight the battle with their employee. Like, if I am, a sales manager, and I'm checking it with my employee, am I going to go talk about their expense report, or am I going to talk about, all the opportunities in the pipeline? Like, every day of the week, I'm talking about the opportunities, right? Because, we want to deliver good results for our partners. And so we have a central approval process today where we do all that. I also think expense approvals on a transaction basis are really hard to do too. It's hard to look at a specific transaction and say, was that good? Was that bad? Like, you have to look a little bit, to Sophia's point before about the pattern. Like, we look across the pattern. So we tend to do, audits on travelers where we'll take a look at what their spend patterns were like. Like we have a policy. The perfect example is we have a policy that prohibits, black cars, right? Like in general, we don't want people running around in black cars, but that doesn't mean that it's always bad or that sometimes you won't need it. Like I mean, if you show up at LAX, this was my favorite. You show up at LAX at like 2-3 in the morning, and you're waiting for an Uber. You got to go to an offsite place. It's deserted there, right? The only thing that can get you is a black car, and it turns out it's $5 more, right? Like the safer, smarter thing. I got in at 3 in the morning. My flight was delayed. I was supposed to get at midnight, which also wasn't great, but I ended up at 2:30, 3 in the morning. Like for $5, like I looked at it, like that's the right thing. So on my expense report, if you looked at it on a transaction basis, the right thing would have been to deny that reject that transaction. You're like out of policy. But we don't do that. But if you look at my entire profile, you'll see I have one black car out of maybe 30, right? Or one black Uber out of 30, which is not so bad. You compare that to someone who's doing that 80% of the time. My point is, it's hard to do it on a transactional basis because you don't get the pattern there. I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm not a huge fan of of the traditional expense approval process, largely because I think it doesn't work. I think it rejects things that should be okay, and it also doesn't catch things that are not okay. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think. But to your point, if the travel's compliant, you let it go, and that's probably 80-90% of the time. There's nothing exciting in this trip that's going to warrant the black car example, right? The gal did what they're supposed to do. It looks like it's within a reasonable amount of spend for whatever that service is. Let's let that one go. And no one needs to review it. It's all automated. You should be more by exception. I see the black car. It's 1 out of 30.
That's how we do it. But the exception always requires context. And that's where it becomes challenging.
Yeah, and I don't know that you're going to be able to collect a whole lot of data for your example on the black car. It's really more, okay, Mr. Mandelbaum, give me the reason why you booked a black car. Okay, move on. Here we go. And the only thing that happens is
and that's the point. I don't move on.
You don't move on.
I don't move
on. What do you do? What do you do?
We later might revisit it and look at patterns.
Okay. So you don't reject.
That's the difference between doing this on a transactional basis and not doing it on a transaction. In a transactional basis, you evaluate the transaction and then you move on, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you can. I mean, you can take an initial pass, an initial determination on a transactional basis. And in your case, you could have a ton of compliant travel, right? 100% from somebody who probably shouldn't be traveling. Now, I don't have that, but that, like, in your world where you've got the compliance, it meets the criteria. But when you look at the totality, you're like, oh my God, that's a lot, given this role and what's going on and all this other stuff. And so I think you need the context and you can't do it on a transactional basis. That's my point.
Okay. So if I understand you right, you let everything go through and then you look at bigger patterns. And if you see something.
No. We have lots of enforcement, lots of gatekeeping in lots of places. I run a police state. No, not really. But
not making any sense to me.
You don't let everything in and then go and see if anything bad's happened later. But my point is that you've got lots of layers, and you're constantly revisiting your data to see things. That's my point.
Okay. Sophia, what are your thoughts on this?
One of our counterparts in sales, Chris O'Brien, talks about this all the time. There is a sliding scale of what is policy and what is enforcement. If policy is on the left of that scale, right, which is how you allow your employees to book, what payment methods you make available.
Does he talk about this? Does he tell all his friends? I don't like it. Like, this is sending me into cardiac arrest. Like I don't want people talking about it. It might be true, but the fact that he talks about it.
I'm going to mute you for a minute, Mandelbaum.
Well, let me you may end up agreeing with me, Stephen. So, like, if policy is on the left, right, and the enforcement piece is on the right in how we review and validate and verify the spend, then to your point, the more you evolve the policy and what behavior you allow, you may be pushing yourself further or closer to your mechanisms of enforcement. And those are the things that we got to think about at the same time we're thinking about behavior and the channels and the things that we allow.
Okay, I feel like we're kind of getting a little bit off the primary topic of the podcast, which is the combination of travel and expense. And I think it's definitely related, and I kind of caused the issue, which is a big win is we can automate the approval process, which Mr. Mandelbaum doesn't go through anyway, so it's irrelevant. But the rest of the world does.
No, we go
And
through approvals. We just don't go through the traditional sense. I mean, we definitely have approvals.
okay, but you said, but how is it non-traditional?
Well, one, I don't have a magic approval. I have a central approval process. So I have a central approving team that will look
Yeah,
at them.
yeah.
And then two, we do it in multiple layers. So we'll do it at the transaction layer, but then we'll go back and look at patterns later on too. So we're not evaluating each transaction one by one. We tend to do them in buckets of similar transactions across multiple travelers at the same time.
Okay. Okay. Well, so let me segue back to kind of data and data consolidation a little bit. Um, how do you, and maybe this is start off with Sophia, the capture, let's just stick with hotels and direct hotel bookings. And any thoughts on the best method to go about making that happen, the value of card data, as in that solution or expense data? What are your thoughts there?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm a little bit of a data nerd on this subject, right? So when I think about card transactions, employee profile data, again, policies, booking data, the booking channel, all of these things are little data stacks, right? They're all little chunks of data that sometimes have 50 or 100 trailing data points associated with them. To Stephen's point earlier, some of the science of this is how do we pair those data sets together so we can create meaningful change, meaningful change in the lift it requires for an employee to buy, to travel, to expense. I think the art that trails behind that is, can we do it in a way that is either going to reduce or eliminate friction in the process while still maintaining those guardrails in an effective way, maintaining visibility? So it's this constant kind of push and pull of how do you balance those two things, the guardrails and the risk.
All right, so I guess what you're alluding to is the guardrail of, do I allow a traveler to book direct or do I require they book through the TMC?
Absolutely, because when you look at a direct booking, right? And say the business says, okay, all of these direct bookings are actually materially more expensive than the indirect bookings or the in-channel bookings, right?
Mhm.
Is it worth it to meet the traveler where they are? Is that a risk I'm looking to absorb to meet them where they want to book? Or is it something that I'm not going to change the policy on? And again, the contrast and the context matters. What's the difference between those bookings? What's the difference in cost, in compliance, in the content that is served up? And is that something that I want to, again, absorb or not?
So, Steve, for you, do you capture direct hotel bookings today
Um,
at a
yes,
transactional level?
yes-ish.
Yes-ish. How do you do that?
So we require booking through our program. In the event that you can't book through our program, and usually our allowable ways are there's a hotel block at a conference I'm going to, or I happen to find. I mean, hotel rate fragmentation is back on the rise. It was horrible, then it wasn't as bad. And now it's back on the rise again. I think we're starting to see it. The requirement is that you send that into our travel team, and we'll basically book it into our system. So that's how we capture the booking. Because what I want to do is I want to run it through the reshopping to see really was it cheaper.
But what if a traveler, I mean, are they just not going to get paid if they book direct? If I just go to
Um,
Marriott Marquis in New York and book it because that's where my customer is staying as well, and it's not available or showing up through the booking tool
yes.
or
I mean,
cheaper.
it's going to be a much rougher road to that getting that approved. To your automation, like it won't be in process, and we're going to look at that when we look at trends. Like, is that person did it once, or are they doing it all the time? Like again, exceptions are fine when they're exceptions. When they become the rule or become the habit, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Policy is
Generally,
what you approve.
we don't allow direct booking. We do not run an open booking program, if that's your question.
And so what is your indirect booking percentage?
Single digits.
Okay. So pretty low, pretty low. But as far as just the data.
Oh, indirect. Well, I think we're talking to what is our non TMC channel? Is that the question you're really asking? Yeah, single digit.
Okay. Okay. That's what I would assume if you have a really strong policy around it. But I'm really just trying to focus on the data. If I book direct, I'm in that single digit category. Do you just not have any detailed data around that hotel booking?
Maybe a little bit, because we get their confirmation. We make them sense the confirmation. We book it into the system. Do we have the rate codes and all that other stuff? No, we don't have that. But we have the rate, and we know the property, and we know a bunch of other high level information.
All right, so you've got what you need for maybe hotel sourcing to see volume by property, stuff like that. But when it comes down to policy, if the guy booked a suite, you may not be aware of that. Or if you booked a...
Well, we are, because we get the they send us the confirmation. So somebody is manually putting it into our systems. We don't have enough of it that an automated, process is warranted.
And what system are they
receipt would
putting
still
in?
become required. No, I don't mean to cut you off, Steve, but a receipt would still be required, right? So at the end
On
of
the
the
back
day,
end, yeah.
Yeah, you still get validation on the content that was booked, what type of room it was, the cost per night. You're still going to end up with those details. It may not be exactly at the point of booking. It'll be at the end, when they check out and they upload their receipt.
Not yes and no. Folios are very detailed in some ways and very sparse in others. Like, you get the individual things, but you don't actually get the room type that they were in a lot of times. Sometimes you can sort of decipher the code up at the top, but it's not like it says presidential suite. It'll say more like room 1000, and you sort of have to back into it. So you get some of it, but not all of it on the back end.
Do you look at that, or do you look at cost? I am so sorry, Steve. Oh my goodness.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Do you look at that or cost per night? Are you more focused on, because say it's presidential suite, but it's $350 a night in New York. Maybe they got a killer deal. Which is your North Star?
Both. It was a killer deal if it was the presidential suite and rooms are going for $800 in New York, right? We have that validated through a reshopping service. If it's $350 for the presidential suite, but it's a dead time of year and everyone else is paying $199, that was a loser deal, right? So that's where, the reshopping is so important in understanding the dynamics of the market. So I'm looking at both. Everything's got to be contextual.
How do you go about
we can't spend up to the max all the time, except for when we have to go over the max. We have to be under the max sometimes too to make it work.
So on that hotel folio data, do you get that by the traveler banging that all in, or are you scanning it and OCRing the document?
Travel's putting a lot of it in. They're attaching receipts. Sometimes, more than sometimes, we're getting level 3 data from the credit card. That's where a bunch of stuff comes from. And properties have they've gone back and forth. There was a time when they weren't, hardly any of them were doing it. Then all of them were doing it. Now we're seeing a little less of it. Some of it's for system issues and privacy issues and things like that we're working through. But we do get a ton through level 3 data is from a credit card is incredible information. And we use that very, very, very heavily.
Okay. And does that cover the majority of the spend?
That I care about? Probably.
Okay. If you were giving a percentage of all the bookings that you've made where you do get level 3 data, 80%, 50%?
Transactions? Probably 75 would be my ballpark. I mean, you're not going to get at a restaurant, generally. I mean, quick serve place, you might get the receipt data, but you're not going to get what happened at the restaurant. Nor do I really care that much, as long as they're within policy parameters that we would consider reasonable.
So you don't care if they bought an expensive bottle of wine at the restaurant?
I don't care if they bought an expensive bottle of wine at the restaurant if they had 20 people at the table and everyone had a quarter of a glass. Yes. I mean, it's all contextual, right? So it all depends. I'm looking more at cost per head at a restaurant. I'm not looking at a meal. It's hard. The same way I don't care about ticket price. Like, what is a ticket? Is it a round trip? Is it one way? Like, I'm looking at basically O&Ds when I look at airfare prices.
No, understood.
Same way same way at a meal, I'm looking at price per head.
Okay. So kind of, I want to circle back on just the opportunity to combine travel and expense data. One of the ideas is in the upfront approval process, that if I have a large database of travel detail and expense detail, and I got a traveler about to go to New York and stay at the Fly American and stay at the Marriott and whatever, and they need approval, could I use that data set to come up with a good guesstimate on what it's going to cost? Or a better guesstimate from what they typically do is just they go into a booking tool, they get some air and hotel costs, and then they kind of throw a number out of $1,500. But it usually misses the transfers, the meals, the entertainment, all the other stuff that tends to pile on. Let's start with Sophia. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's where your analytics exercises become so powerful. Certainly, is there an opportunity to bring that data up front and as part of the booking process? Could you maybe alert a manager of what it typically costs to run a less than 5-person event in this city for these dates, right? Could you do that? I think you could. What is available to a lot of our customers right this second is taking a look at their analytics and running a little bit more of a historical and saying what has been the average trend for groups of people together or for travel to New York City at this type of hotel for these dates, and using that historical data to say, what is our budget for the next year? What is our budget for these types of meetings? And using both together.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of an individual basis, because right now I think the upfront pre-trip approval process just seems very cumbersome. Because I actually have to go book the entire trip, come up with an estimate, I send it off for approval, I wait for that approval to occur, and then I can kind of continue the process. But the approver is missing a lot of information in the total cost of that trip, right? And can we augment that with expense data on a whole bunch of other trips across the entire Emburse 25,000 customers to come up with a better guesstimate? Steve, how do you do it at EAB?
I mean, I think your question is, should we go through the same process to do prior authorization on a trip that we do for major surgery at a hospital? Is basically what your question is, right? Like, should we go and find all the prices and get it pre-approved and all that stuff? We don't do it. So I think we do closer to what Sophia said. We have a ballpark estimate on what every trip should cost. We've done it through our analytics. We know how much, we think the airfare will cost and how much the hotel and how much the ground transportation, how much the meal will. So sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong, but on average it works out. And I think that helps us decide in the moment, is this trip worthwhile? Should we go and do this event? And it's close enough. It's close enough for decision making. I don't know that going through that analysis each time you're going to do it, unless it's a truly exceptional or novel situation, makes sense.
And so does it ever hit a budget before the money's spent?
Like almost like a hold on a credit card, almost like
no.
You're authorized. No, I mean, not actual, but like, do we project it in advance of the expense hitting? Is that the question you're asking?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, look, we've set a budget beginning of the year for how much we're going to have for T&E. And if you go over that mid-year, like a lot of folks did in COVID, is there any checks and balances to sort of wait, guys, we've got to either get more budget or slow down the trips? How do you do that?
I mean, we're accumulating as it goes. Most business travel is not booked many, many, many months in advance. And so there's a pretty tight booking window in general. And so you're catching it as the time between you're committing to travel and you're actually traveling is really relatively tight. And so you're seeing that spend come in and you're seeing where you're trending versus budget. And then you're also able to go back, to Sophia's point, it will go back and say, we estimated each trip was going to be X number of dollars. We're actually finding it to be X times 2 right now. And that's why we're running hot now. And then you got to recalibrate. You got to decide, hey, I'm either going to do less trips, or boy, this is really valuable. We got to move some stuff around in the budget.
Right. And that's so, in my opinion, that's the value of the pre-trip approval process, which is I can kind of stop this trip before it actually taken because we run out of budget. And to your point, I've either got to get more budget, or we're about to, maybe we haven't run out yet, but we're on a really fast path to running out before year end. And we need to adjust accordingly.
You can shut the spigot off without having to do all these prior, pre-trip approvals and prior authorizations. Like, an estimate of what you think each trip is going to cost. And we might be wrong, but we're not going to be a lot wrong here. And so I think if you're only halfway through the year and you're 75% through on the budget, one of two things have happened. Either your travel is very front loaded in your year, or your per trip cost is much higher than you expected. And that means one of two things. Either you got to change your policy and see if you could travel cheaper, or what's been more common in the environment today is it's actually costing us more. And is the ROI still there? And that's a totally different question. Like that, you have to then decide where your budget priorities are.
Okay. So just we're getting a little bit closer on time here. So just back on the original theme of combining travel and expense data. If there were one thing that you could accomplish, let's say magically travel and expense is now merged. You can now have all the detail you need in the insights and this nice little data warehouse of all the travel data linked up with the expense data, and you can ask questions of it, and you can link it into automate approval process and so on. What's the one thing that you think is most important to come out of that? Sophia, let's start with you.
I mean, not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but I think this is actually where we're going to see generative AI come into the fold, because when you have really contextualized data, then you can apply some of the latest and greatest technology to it and start asking questions of it. How could I iterate on policy for my sales teams, my, on the ground adjusters in the insurance business, right? Like you can get really granular with that data and ask questions of it in a extremely meaningful way. And then again, to all the points we've talked about thus far, iterate on what you allow and what you don't allow, what would be meaningful to change, what would be less so. And you can make those decisions in a way that is scaling and evolving as your business is.
So is there one question that is top of mind that you would ask of this data? Or would you just let some sort of AI bot go after it and try to find something?
Well, the question that I would be asking is, what is valuable? And that may change throughout the year. The question may change throughout the year of what is valuable. Is that going to be related to cost, compliance, again, or content? And how am I going to change throughout the year as those values may change or differ? So I could be asking, where could I save money? Where could I lean into more of our high value client base, right? Spend more time with those individuals, go on the road more often with that type of customer. What can I derive from this data set that gives me a lever to pull on? And that can be a myriad of questions, right? Depending on the size, the scale, the type of industry you're in, but being able to ask a meaningful question of your data to get you to those levers, I think that's the nirvana state.
Yeah, on your value comment, it's always been, in my opinion, kind of a panacea to say, is there ROI from this trip? Should we take it? And without just a ton of context and detail and conversation, it's I think not possible to figure that out, because it's really going to vary on the individual trip and what you hope to accomplish. And is it just really establishing a relationship with a client, or is it actually closing a sale? Whatever it might be. That's a tough one. Steve, what would you do? What's
that's the science. I was going to say, travel, we think of travel as an expense, but it's really an investment. And so you want to figure out what that return on investment. I'd be outcome focused. I'd want to marry it up with the outcomes. So did it, further pipeline? Did we open up additional opportunities? Were we successful at launching and delivering our site on time, like we said we were going to? I think that's going to help us decide, should we do more of this? Should we do less of it? You know, I once had someone come up to me with a bunch of savings opportunities, and they were horrible ideas. Sure, they would save money, but they were terrible partner experiences. And I said, well, why would we spend all this money and not do X? Like, this is the most valuable thing. Like, why would you not, do this particular activity? And so I think we want to get people to do smarter trips. And without seeing the outcomes, it's hard to know what those are. So there is a such thing as a trip that is too cheap, or too inexpensive, that it doesn't meet the goal or doesn't get the maximum value out of it. That's crazy. Like, I hate when people buy the cheapest product or skip certain things that has that where they really lose the big value add there. Now, that's not to say that I want people spending all over the place. I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, but I want to be thoughtful about where the spend is. And I think that's the hope of where we get with this. And that's why I've always been like, travel analytics, not that exciting, but marry that up with Salesforce data and other things. All of a sudden it does become interesting.
Yeah. But marrying this data, travel and expense, you've got all the detail in the world, you've got accurate dollar amounts tied to it. But from where you are today, what is the big thing that would accomplish for you? Because I'm stuck a little bit. This is going to take.
I think you'd be able to determine best practice. And I think you'd be able to determine best practice by role. And maybe it's not for your very top performer, but in general, in a large organization, you got people in certain roles, you'd be able to say, here's best practice on the road. Best practice on the road in this job, best practice on the road if you're in New York, best practice if you're doing X. Like, I think it helps you establish what best practices are that get you the best outcomes at the best value.
And how do you... I'm having a hard time visualizing how that actually happens. How do you determine the best practice from this glob of data that's available to you?
Well, you have some pretty detailed data on what it is. How much was, airfare, and how much was food, and what did you do, and how many attendees were at this lunch, and what was the level of these attendees? Were they, junior folks, work on the project? Are they senior people? Same thing on our side. Was it, only one person from our side? Was it multiple people? Like, you've got to marry it up with the rest of it to figure out the business outcome, because, business is about relationships and people. And so you've got to be able to figure that out, and you've got to make some science out of it.
But to your point,
you can make science out of it.
But you don't have the outcome. Look, I've got all. I know
you have the outcome.
Where does that come from?
Other systems. It's not going to come from your expense system. You got to marry it up with other systems.
Okay. Well, I was just talking about travel and expense. I wasn't thinking we're going to go connect up to Salesforce.com and pull a bunch of pipeline data.
We have to.
Well, we can't, because we don't have Emburse doesn't have access to that.
Yeah, but without the travel and expense data, there's nothing to link to Salesforce anyway. So you need that. So it's necessary, but may not be. I guess it may not be totally sufficient to get to the utopia of it all.
Right.
Is my point.
Right.
But I can tell you, if you just have, I can tell you that if you just have high level information and you don't get the detail, you got no chance of mining through it. Zero.
Well, no, okay. I think we can get to the detail. It's just getting to the outcome is just outside of scope of what we can provide a client, I believe. No one's going to let us connect up to their Salesforce instance and export all that data and pop it in just to show some sort of, here's the perfect best practice to generate this particular kind of outcome.
But in many orgs, someone's doing that. In many orgs, there's an internal analytics team that is looking at that stuff, whether it lives in FP&A or in your sales ops group or in other, customer success functions, things like that. People are looking on what their investment is. They have to, because when they go through the budget cycle each year, they got to determine how much they're going to put into travel versus other initiatives.
God, I've just never
those
seen...
exercise scale. Well, I think those exercises scale based upon where you sit within the organization, because Steve, to our, a frontline manager, think about these teams that may have 15, 20 people on a team, 5 people on that team do not travel frequently. If I'm able to see as a manager, how do people pay, and what has been made available to them? Oh, these 5 people don't even have a card. Maybe I'm going to actually issue them a virtual card for SKO. I don't need to go get lines of credit for these these 5 people, I'm going to issue them a virtual card so that they have a predetermined spend limit to go purchase, travel meals for SKO. That becomes really powerful and really meaningful to enable a frontline manager to make decisions with it. But that's going to continue to scale up, and those exercises scale up as you move further up the hierarchy of need and of exercise.
Okay. So I feel like we've kind of gotten a really blue sky in the potential. If we bring it back a little bit, the potential to actually automate the expense report. I don't want to fill out a report ever again. And if I'm compliant and I do the right thing on the travel side and we capture all that travel data, I scan my receipts while I'm on my trip, all that data gets merged together. The only thing I need to do is maybe put, did you take an Uber to the airport? Well, I got that anyway. Did you drive to the airport? Yes. Okay, we'll calculate the mileage. There's an expense there. And then done. Is that a possible outcome?
We're close. We're really, really close to that now.
You are?
Yeah.
How did you get to that point?
Combination of book data and card data flowing into our expense system. And we capture a lot of stuff on the front end. And so the touch on when it comes to the expenses is very, very light. So we do that today.
And how much of it's automated?
Define automated.
Yeah, where the traveler just never has to touch it. Doesn't have to do anything.
Oh, zero, because I want them to certify that this was for business travel, because it is very easy to reach and unintentionally go into your wallet, pull out the business card and charge it to the business credit card by accident, like you're holding a wallet full of plastic and you pull the wrong one out. So I need someone to say, yes, this was for business, but this notion that they need to do a bunch of coding and upload receipts and stuff, the vast majority of that we get electronically today. So we don't have to do that.
All right. So to your point, other than kind of this stamp of approval, this all looks correct. How many of the expense reports are sort of almost untouched?
Well, that are not touched beyond it's hard to say because your definition of it, but my definition of how much do not require additional information, probably 85%.
Okay.
85% are probably, 2 clicking in.
And do you think you're the norm, or do you think you've gone above and beyond the average company?
I mean, there's a wide world out there. I think I should be the norm, but I learned that I'm not. You tell me all the time that I'm not. So you're the norm, Steve. You're the norm.
I'm the norm. No, I think you've gone above and beyond. Most companies that I've talked to, there's quite a bit of manual stuff that still needs to be done. And then there's this kind of draconian approval process. And if those two things can be automated, you've bought back a whole lot of time and traveler satisfaction and a bunch of other stuff as an end result. So,
but all travel is not equal, just to be clear. Like some organizations have client travel where they bill back the clients for travel and they have to code it to different projects and they want to do project level accounting, a lot of consulting. So I think it's hard to sort of take a broad brush approach on that. It really depends on the travel, how it's done, and how an organization wants to account for it. A lot of that touching is not, I think today for most organizations that have evolved, it's not the traditional, hey, I got to recode the receipt. It's more of the accounting coding that you wouldn't get from the receipt or wouldn't get from the initial transaction. Now there is an opportunity. There is a little bit of an opportunity if you can get them to do the coding. You got to do the coding one way or another, unless you've got you're announcing today the new Emburse mind readings module. But if you don't have the Emburse mind reading module yet, and that's coming in the future, you could, in advance of booking, add some of those things and then push those later into the process. But at some point, you got to figure out what it was for, particularly for organizations that want to attach it and do some sort of project level accounting.
Yeah, my argument is travelers are doing it twice. They're doing it once in the booking process for whatever reason, which goes into a UDID or a mark or whatever for travel reporting, and then it goes into again in the expense report. But if you were to marry those two together, right?
That's a waste. You are right if that's a waste. If you believe that everyone's doing that, then everyone's wasting a lot of time. I agree. You shouldn't have to do something twice.
Yeah, it's like purpose of trip. You see it all the time. What's the purpose? And then when you're filling out the expense report, you got to put in purpose of trip again. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Okay, so we need to kind of wrap this up. I think the conversation's been interesting, which is kind of the goal. Sophia, any closing comments, remarks that you'd like to make around this topic?
It's just been a really interesting conversation. I loved hearing about your program, Stephen. I think it further reinforces that there's multiple tentacles to these programs and how you look at that data and what is value in the eye of business. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? Is being able to find that value and validate it, verify it, and charge forward.
Steve, closing comments, thoughts?
I think Sophia's got to take a deeper dive into your travel data.
She does.
I'd like to know the outcome of all the barbecue and stuff. She really should put that together. No, I think there's a great opportunity here, and anything we can do to further is good for everyone in the industry.
Well, Emburse is definitely focused on it. We're putting a lot of time and effort and resource to it, we're starting to see some initial success, but there's a lot more to come in the results. So, okay, just kind of wrapping this up. Thanks everyone for listening to the podcast. As I mentioned, on January 28th, there's a webinar. If you're interested in kind of listening in on more data and ROI conversations with corporate buyers and such, go register on the emburse.com website. And if you're interested in these podcasts, we're trying to do these at least once a month, if not more frequent. And the format's going to be similar, where we've got a buyer that's got a lot of experience on the topic, as well as some folks from Emburse that are working on solutions. So with that, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Sophia. Really appreciate your time and your comments, and hope to see you soon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.